HALB is very excited to have Deborah Majoras with us today, currently Chief Legal Officer of Procter Gamble, formerly Chair of the Federal Trade Commission, and before that, Deputy Assistant Attorney General at the DOJ's Antitrust Division. After earning her JD from the University of Virginia School of Law, Deborah Majoras clerked in the Federal District Court in D.C. and was a partner at Jones Day doing antitrust work. In 2001, Ms. Majoras was appointed the Deputy Assistant Attorney General at the Department of Justice's Antitrust Division. From 2004 to 2008, Ms. Majoras served as Chair of the U.S. Federal Trade Commission under President George W. Bush. She became Vice President and General Counsel of Procter Gamble in 2008. Procter Gamble is one of the largest consumer goods companies in the world. Its portfolio includes many familiar brands, including Bounty, Charmin, Crest, Febreze, Gillette, Olay, Oral-B, Pampers, Tide, etc. The list goes on. P&G serves consumers in more than 180 countries around the world. So, without further ado, could you just describe, back when you were in RT, how did you envision your career and be where you are today?
Well, first, let me just say thanks to Elizabeth and to all of you for having me here today. It's great to see all of you, so thank you. I think back when I was sitting where you're sitting, I didn't know a whole lot about the legal profession, truthfully, before I got to law school at UVA. I didn't know all that many lawyers growing up. I grew up in a really small town, so all the lawyers I knew were kind of birth to death lawyers, if you will, and did a lot of wills and trusts and that sort of thing. And so I was just really kind of trying to figure it out. And it was in the 80s, and the 80s were kind of really the heyday for the rise of the large corporate law firm. You remember the movie Wall Street, and sort of the law firms were kind of in New York and elsewhere were sort of the counterpart to that era. And so we were all interviewing like crazy with law firms. And this was all very new to me, and I was sort of thought it was crazy that so many firms would even want to interview me. So I really definitely thought I would go in that direction. And then I wanted to do a clerkship, which I did do in Federal District Court in D.C. So I wasn't thinking very far past those couple of things. Thinking about going to a law firm, possibly when you get there wanting to make partner, but not really thinking a whole lot beyond that at that time.
So how did you make the transition from being a partner at a law firm into government, and why do you think President George Bush selected you to be the FTC chair?
Well, I made the transition to government not because I was actually thinking about doing it, and that was part of the plan. Frankly, I was doing well at Jones Day. I was getting put on kind of the right committees in the partnership, and getting client work coming my way, and I had mentors in the firm, so it was a very good and comfortable situation, quite honestly. It was completely opportunistic. So I was actually in the process, my now husband and I were in the process of moving to Washington, D.C. from Ohio, and one of my bosses at the law firm came to me and said, I'm about to be appointed the Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust in the new administration, and I'd love to have you come and be one of my deputies. And frankly, I had never campaigned. I had never been really very political at all. So it was just sort of this really interesting idea that I would now be a political appointee. But for that stage of my career and my age, and now specializing in antitrust, to be able to have one of the leadership positions in my field was really something that was very, very attractive to me. And so I decided to make the switch, always intending in my mind, I think, that I would go back. The transition was rather stark, to be honest, because I went from working in a law firm surrounded by lots of other partners, definitely had teams of associates working for me and with me, and had started to run cases. But when I got to the Department of Justice Antitrust Division, suddenly I was leading a few hundred lawyers. Leading is very different from doing, quite honestly. And so I had to figure that out in a hurry because, by the way, they knew way more about doing the job than I did. In fact, I'll tell you, in your midst today in the red for the Stanley Cup for the Caps is Matthew Hammond, who's a fellow here at Harvard right now, who I didn't know I was going to see today, but he was one of those people who I'm talking about at the Antitrust Division, who was working there when I got there, who knew a lot more than I did. So it's great to see you again, Matthew. Thank you for coming. And you know, the key in a moment like that, I think, is to listen way more than you talk, and to really like roll up your sleeves. Because think about it this way: these great folks who work in our government have to suffer through every 4 years, roughly, some new group of supposed hotshots getting appointed and coming in to the top of their organization and saying, now you're going to do it my way, right? And so I sort of felt like they were all looking at me a little bit like, yeah, what? They weren't really, but you know what I mean? Like, what do you have to offer to us? And so you have to, you know, I learned very quickly in leadership that it's not about you, it's about them, and it's about them wanting to follow with you, wanting to come along with you, not having to force it. And so I learned a lot in that, and it was a really good transition. The other thing that I learned, which Matthew will definitely remember, and this I think, it is the transition to what you asked me about the president appointing me eventually to go to the FTC. I was being considered at one point to head the antitrust division when my boss at DOJ left. And it came down to a two-person race, one of my colleagues and myself. He and I were good friends, so we said to each other, you know, we're not gonna, one of us is gonna get this and one of us isn't. But we're gonna support each other either way because we're friends and we're colleagues. He ended up getting the job and I didn't. It was very disappointing to me. When you're in a public role, to tell you the truth, it's also a little bit, you feel a little bit humiliated, right? Not as many people are looking at you as you think are, but but it feels that way when you're in a public position. And so I had, you know, I had a choice to make. Fortunately, I figured this out before I talked to the Attorney General about it. You know, your friends around you will always support you, and they'll always feel even worse for you than you feel, right? So you'll get crowds around you saying, this isn't fair, you shouldn't stay, you can't work for him, you know, maybe it's because you're a woman, they don't want you. And all these kinds of things. And you can really self-indulge. You know, you can say, yeah, I should, that's right, you know. But that didn't feel right either. You know, I kind of pitied myself for a day or two, but it didn't really feel very good. So anyway, I thought a lot about it. And by the time I had my meeting with the Attorney General, he said, you know, I just wanted to tell you that we've decided to give this position to Hugh, but we really hope that you'll stay and work with him because you're such a fabulous team and we really want you here. And I opened my mouth and words to this effect popped out, which were, thank you very much, Mr. Attorney General. Hugh is a great choice for you. He's a fantastic lawyer. He's a great American, and he will serve very well, and I will stay and work with him because I still think I have a lot that I can offer, and I'd like to continue serving. I really do love my job. And I tell you, I kind of surprised myself that all that popped out. But and then, to be totally honest, I walked out into the hallway and burst into tears, and you know, had my moment. But the next year that I had was one of the best years of my career. Quite honestly, we had a blast working together and doing that job. And then, so to switch to the FTC role. When I was nominated by the president for that role, someone in the White House counsel or White House personnel office told me that one of the reasons I had been selected for the FTC, in addition to expertise, was because of the way that I handled the disappointment. In other words, people like to see, are you in this for you and just you, or are you in this for the team? And so that was an advantage. And then the other thing I would tell you is, is that, I feel a little embarrassed saying this in front of Matthew, but I always did feel that the career staff appreciated that as well, because they knew that it was hard to do at first, but they also felt that I was in it with them as opposed to just putting the notch on the belt so that I could move on, to some other big job. So those are great learnings, and that was apparently part of why I ended up with the FTC job. And I guess the last thing I would say about that is, the real lesson for me there was, no one will ever think poorly of you because you suffer a disappointment, because we all do. Like, it's just not a straight line. It looks like a straight line because resumes, if you graph them, look like this, right? But you guys know this by now, right? It's actually a lot more like this. But what people will watch is, how do you react? How do you handle it? Do you handle it with grace? Do you handle it with and honesty? Like, hey, I'm disappointed, but I can handle it, and I'm going to move on. So I think that's valuable to people.
So you served as the chair of the FTC from 2004 to 2008. What were some of the key major issues you had to grapple with during your time there?
Yeah, so the FTC is really divided into two parts. There's the antitrust side, which I was very familiar with, having grown up as an antitrust lawyer, and then there's the consumer protection side, which honestly is the really, really fun part of it, because the FTC's job is really to protect consumers from all manner of frauds and other issues that come up in commerce. And so some of the issues that we really grappled with on that side were consumer privacy, which was really just emerging as a bigger issue. It's sort of funny to look back, because our big issues were spam and spyware, and we hardly talk about those issues today, but those were huge and very new to people. So there isn't a privacy agency in the United States like there is in a lot of other countries, and so it really fell to us, and we set a lot of standards for corporations to follow in terms of, when you must protect consumers' information, what do you do? Not to specify exactly how to do it, but to specify that you have to have reasonable standards for doing it. So that, I would say, was a pretty big issue. Another, always in antitrust, there's plenty of mergers to look at. There's plenty of issues there. And a lot of what we were dealing with was the international side of that, because antitrust was spreading around the world. But you had a lot of very new and developing economies. And truthfully, it's hard to have antitrust law if you don't have a market, since antitrust is inherently about markets. And so we spent a lot of time working with others around the world in terms of how to, what does this mean? What does it mean to have a market economy? What does it mean to be a regulator or enforcer within that economy? And so that was another big issue during our time.
So then after 2008, you made another big transition from government to the private sector. What influenced that decision, and then how did you fix P&G specifically?
Yeah, one thing about political appointments is that they end. So you will have to leave at some point. And in the case of the FTC, which is an independent agency, there are set terms. It's not necessarily when the president leaves. There's actually a set term. And my term was up sometime in 2008. So I knew I was going to have to leave. So I'd started thinking about what I wanted to do. And it was really interesting, because I actually loved being in a law firm. I mean, sometimes law firms get bad raps, I recognize, but I just was very fortunate. I had a really terrific experience. I had great work, great mentors, and I worked very, very hard, but I really enjoyed my work, the clients. And so, had I not gone into government, I might still be there, truthfully, but I looked at going back to a firm, or looked at going back to Jones Day. By then, I was married to my husband. He was at Jones Day. I didn't want to do that. And it was hard to imagine going to another firm. And there's something sometimes in life where you're not sure you're going to be able to recreate what you had before, because you move on and things change. And I changed, and the world changed. So I started thinking about Inhouse, because I'd seen others do it. And then all of a sudden, I hadn't done anything about it. And one day, out of the blue, I got a call from a search firm asking me if I'd like to talk to Procter Gamble. which I said I would like to talk to Procter Gamble. Of course, first I had to call the ethics office at the FTC to see if I could do this, since Procter Gamble is the largest advertiser in the world, and the FTC regulates advertising. So we worked all that out. Why did I go to Procter? You know, a lot of people have asked me that question because, even within Procter, because Procter & Gamble has always been a promote from within company. So people go there right out of school, at least traditionally they have, and stay for a long time. So on the executive floor where I sit today, almost everyone has been there 30 to 35 years. And I've been there 10, and I'll always be the newbie as long as, you know, till I retire. I'm old, but I'm always the newbie. And so in any event, like, why would you do that? Why would you go to a place where everybody else? And I said, well, because there must be something really special about it if this many talented people want to stay for so long. So I checked it out. And in the end, a very big part of it was for P&G's values as a company, which you know, people always ask, especially in other countries, how can you go so quickly between the private sector, the public sector, back to the private sector? And I say, well, it's very, very easy for me because, quite frankly, I believe that when you are an attorney, your job is to represent your client to the best of your ability, whoever your client is, right? And I also think that our system of government works best when the private and the public sector are working together. So companies are being very, very responsible. Governments are listening to them and you know, about what's going on in markets, and it's a very symbiotic relationship when we do it right. So, but that all being said, I didn't, having just coming out of government and just kind of my own personal value set, I didn't really want to go to a company that lives on the edge either. And Procter has long had a set of values and principles that, you know, way before it was in vogue to do it, and a really strong track record. And I really appreciated the people I met, and I felt like I could probably fit in there. So so I went, and there were moments in that first year where I was like, what the hell have I done? Because the kind of the currency at a place like Procter & Gamble is relationships. And when you don't have them, no matter how experienced you are, no matter all the other jobs I had, you know, there were just moments where I felt like an idiot and I felt sort of out of place. So it takes a little while, but the experiences I had going into 2 government agencies completely cold helped me understand how to go into Procter and start adding value and building relationships.
Could you describe a bit about how the legal team is organized at Procter & Gamble and
Sure.
how many countries there's lawyers in?
Yeah. So our lawyers are really organized around 3 different vectors. And by the way, in our team, we have legal, government relations, and a group we call brand protection, which is our anti-counterfeit group. Counterfeiting is a big problem in consumer products. And so we have to do a lot of work on that, and that group sits with us. So on the legal side, we have roughly 420 legal professionals. So that includes lawyers, paralegals, executive assistants, and in some countries what we call patent agents. So those are folks on the legal side. Of lawyers, it's probably 325. And they're organized really along 3 vectors. So I have some lawyers who are devoted to particular business units. You know, baby care, home care, beauty care. And then I have lawyers who are organized geographically, because law is still inherently local. And then lawyers who are experts, and we call them centers of excellence. So I have antitrust experts, and I have digital law experts, and labor and employment experts, and some others. We have lawyers on the ground in 45 countries, which sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but we sell into 180 countries. So it's a lot of laws to cover, a lot of ground to cover, and our team really does an excellent job. And of course, we supplement with outside counsel as needed. But it's a good, you know, one of the things that I've really tried to do in my time, I felt like we were global when I came in the sense that we had lawyers all over the world, but I didn't feel like we were global in the sense that we were really a team and working together and leveraging each other's strengths and knowledge. And I feel like we do that a lot better now. And I think it's become a stronger team. Plus, to tell you the truth, it's a lot more fun for people. Like you know that just from how much fun you can have with your classmates, and you love having a diverse group to get to know. And it's the same with what we do. People see the richness in that, and they really enjoy being able to work with their colleagues in China or wherever.
So as a chief legal officer, how much influence do you have over the corporate strategy, or how much do you interact with the business leaders?
Yeah, I interact with the business leaders a ton. I really kind of divide my job into three vectors as well. I have the side of running the legal department. I have I'm actually the corporate secretary for the company too, so I work very closely with our board of directors. And then I'm an advisor to the CEO and to all of the other leaders of the company. And so that's the piece where I'm interacting. And I would say, both formally and informally, probably more informally, right? So the one thing that's I felt was really important when I came in is, as a lawyer, you want to be the trusted advisor to the business. You want the folks in the business to want to come and talk to you, to feel like that's of value to them, to build into their strategies ways to make sure that we are complying with what we need to comply with. As I always say to them, look, if you come to me after you've already baked your cake and you hand it to me and say, take a bite and tell me if you like it, I really only have two answers to give you, yes or no. But if I'm involved in the baking of that cake with you and have some input, then by the end we will have a cake that we will all feel is very good. And so that's a simplistic example, or a simplistic metaphor. But that's what I've really tried to build with this team. That the legal advisors need to be in at the beginning of what we're doing, so that we can help with your strategy. Not all of it just being defensive, not all of it on the compliance side, but we have a ton of intellectual property at P&G with all these products we have. There are a lot. In fact, I just spent time with our Gillette patent lawyers this morning. I mean, we have a ton of patents, and we have a lot of trademarking. And so helping from getting from the lab to the shelf, there's a whole range of lawyer partners who can really help the business. So that's kind of the way we've tried to set it up. But for me, on a daily basis, no day is ever the same, because the business leaders who are my colleagues are just constantly, can I pop in? Can I come see you? Do you have 5 minutes? And a lot of times they're not strictly legal problems. They rarely are strictly legal problems. It's just, what do you think about this? How would you handle this? How do we do this? And we use our judgments and try to work together. And that's what makes the job really fun. I mean, that's why I'm there. I really enjoy being involved in the way a business runs. And quite honestly, with what consumers expect today, what citizens expect today from companies, it goes beyond just legal compliance, and it goes to just really the overall feeling of corporate responsibility. We call it citizenship at P&G, that people distrust big institutions now. The way that you gain trust is to show that we're a force for good. And yes, we need to make profit for our shareholders, and we are doing that. But in doing so, we can also be involved in conversations around gender equality, and we can also serve with our products for people in need. And so there's really just a lot of overlap in that now, in terms of how we conduct ourselves as a company.
So elaborating on the social responsibility aspect, I know P&G is doing a lot with the gender in media advertising. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a bit more about that campaign? Sure.
Yeah, I mean, advertising is one of the most powerful influencers. I don't know if it will continue to be so in your generation, because with all the technology now, you can skip through all of it. But then if you hear about a good ad, you can just pull it up on YouTube, which is very different. But look, well over 80% of the people who buy our products are women. Women still largely in the world buy most of the household products, and even buy, for example, Gillette razors for their husbands and partners. So that's a fact. When we talk about the consumer in Procter Gamble, we say she. a lot of times people have defaulted to the pronoun he, but we say she because that's the reality. And so when we decided, here's the thing. When you're a company today, everyone wants your help with every charitable and other good citizenship endeavor, and you can't do everything. So you have to really choose. And we decided at one point to sit down and choose, what is our equity as a company and where can we best really be of service? And gender equality was one of the pillars that we chose because we serve women so much, and because, for example, in our fem care business, we have we have a really strong fem care and beauty care. We have a very strong connection to women as well within the equity of our products. So we chose that, and so we've done some really good and interesting advertising. It's funny. You look at it and you're like, is this really advertising? Or it's just sort of, it all starts to meld together a little bit in terms of what we view on video and the like. But we've done some very interesting stuff. For example, our Like a Girl campaign, where it struck us as very wrong that the phrase "like a girl" when we all grew up was a negative phrase. And what was interesting is, I don't know if you've ever, I think some of you are nodding and you've seen it, but when you ask very young girls, what does it mean to run like a girl? They will look at you and say, it means run as fast as you can, okay? And then when you ask adolescent girls, what does it mean to you to run like a girl? They make fun of themselves, right? They do like you're just running like this kind of thing. And so we were asking the question with experts, what happens to girls in adolescence? What happens? Why do we have this drop in confidence in girls and adolescents? And we really took a look at that. And so we did a lot of advertising, like, let's make like a girl mean something really positive, which it should. And it really is fascinating. If you test people once they've seen that advertising versus before, and then you ask them like a girl, their thought meter on whether it's a positive thing goes way up. And so that's what we're hoping to do. We're just hoping to make change, and so we have several different. But again, it's about gender equality. It's not about just promotion of women. It's about gender equality. And we have this other great ad that basically says. Nobody, how do we do this? Basically, dishes don't care who does them, but a whole series of things showing men and women less in traditional gender roles and more in, and we're doing a lot of that. We're doing things, we've done a very controversial ad, just shifting gears for a minute, with respect to African American families, called The Talk. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but it was controversial because it was very straightforward. It was done with the knowledge that many African American families have to have talks with their children about certain things. So the first one is a mother braiding her daughter's hair and saying, don't ever let someone tell you that you're pretty for a black girl. You are just pretty, okay? And then there's one, the really tough one where a mother's talking to her daughter who's driving for the first time and saying, if you get pulled over, and she was saying, Mom, I'm fine, it'll be fine. And the mother said, I'm not talking about you getting in an accident, I'm talking about you coming home. And it's very powerful. And of course, there were people who didn't like it. But when we got some hate mail and people saying they didn't like it, we doubled down and we showed it more. Because we have decided that we are going to be part of these conversations because they're important for our society and they're important for the people who buy our products, and we're going to be part of it. So anyway, I'm sometimes asked the question by other general counsels like, oh my gosh, how do you feel about this? And I said, well, we're all in, right? We're going to do this, and people aren't always going to like it. But that's okay. We can we sell enough. We can weather that, and overall we're getting very positive response. So if you haven't seen any of it, look it up on YouTube. It's good stuff.
Very interesting. So last question before we open it up to the audience. You're on the boards of many independent companies. How does that influence your strategy or decision making at P&G, if it does? Yeah, I'm on the board of Valero Energy Corporation, so one other for-profit company, and then I'm on the board of several nonprofits, probably more than I should do, but it's hard to say no to some of these things. I'm on the board of a hospital,
And I'm on the board of an organization called the Leadership Council on Legal Diversity and a few other things. First of all, there are some people who tend to think that doing these other things just takes time away from your work, and so maybe, it does. You have to juggle it. It's not easy to juggle, but I actually think I'm better at my job in Procter, because I think the worst thing that any of us can do is just kind of develop a tunnel vision, and if I'm just in Cincinnati at Procter all the time, I mean, even people in Cincinnati call us Proctoids, right? I mean, it's like this, they always say they know who the Procter people are. You can tell when they're walking down the street, kind of scary. But you just have to get yourself out of, if you really look at what, if you look today at what smart people are saying about what it's going to mean to lead in the future and so forth, one of the number one things is, what is the diversity of your network in all different forms of diversity, not just ethnic and gender, but just in terms of, are you getting out of your comfort zone and talking to people who aren't in your everyday routine? And I just think that's really important. It makes me fresher, better thinker, more creative. So I do think that my board work does that for me. Valero Energy, very, very interesting company to be on, lots of challenges. Obviously in the fossil fuels area, they also are a huge ethanol producer. So there's a lot of good discussion going on there about the future of energy, which I really like being a part of. It's very dynamic. And being on a board and then working closely with the Procter board, it's really good to be on two sides of things, right? You're really better at your job when you can understand the other side, especially from a communication standpoint. So I think it does. I think it actually it does make me better, even though there are times when on the weekend I just wish I could lie around and watch a football game. But I've taken on this other stuff, so that's my choice.
Actually, one final question. So you've been in a private law firm, you've been in government, and you've been in the private sector at a company. Out of all of those roles, what has been your favorite so far, and what recommendations or advice would you have for students considering these different options?
Wow, it's so hard to say what's my favorite. From the advice standpoint, what I would say is our profession is just incredibly rich, and there's just so much opportunity. So whatever you end up doing in the next year or two, do it. Well, I always say, don't ever put yourself in a position where someone else tells you you can't do that job any longer if you want to, right? So even if it's not your dream job, work it hard and make sure that you do well there, and then just keep your eyes open for other opportunities, because they will be there. And it's really hard to plan your career and actually have it, and I think you guys know that. Our generation more probably thought it was more of a straight line, but it's becoming so much less of a straight line. But that's a good thing. That's because there's just so many more new and interesting things to do. Even when I was coming out of law school, in-house jobs were considered like a lot more secondary to law firm jobs. And I think that's changed too. So I've really loved and valued all of these while I was doing them. I would say this to you. If you can, at some point in your career, do some form of public service in the government, it really is a special thing to do. When I was at the Justice Department, I got to argue this appeal to the en banc DC Circuit in the sort of famous Microsoft case, the antitrust case against Microsoft. And I actually argued against Robert Bork. So it was obviously a pretty big moment in my career. And honestly, to be able to stand up and say, may it please the court, my name is Deborah Majoras and I represent the United States of America, I'm pretty patriotic, so that was pretty special. And working with fine public servants like Matthew, really, really special. So I have to say I loved that. I loved making policy. I hated the politics, and still do, but I loved making policy. And fortunately, when you work in the government, the stuff we read every day about the politics, it can influence you and at times even bring you down, but mostly you're doing your thing. Right? You're quietly going about doing the business of our government, and you're not always worrying about what's going on in the news media, which is nice. So I would say that's a great thing, and And I do, as I said, I really do love what I'm doing now. But in all of them, the key has been, the number one key has been just being surrounded by enormously talented and good people who make me better every day and teach me. And that's what matters really and truly in all of this, I think, in terms of job satisfaction. So it's been really fun. Although whenever I say that, so things like this, I feel like, am I retired already? Do you guys, are you Monty Python fans? Monty Python of the Holy Grail? I'm not dead yet. So we'll see what else happens. But anyway, thank you for that.
Well, great. Audience questions?
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. One thing that you said that really struck me was that your legal team is 420 people, the size of many law firms.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could comment on, so one thing that you could talk about is the flow of work in law firms in-house. I was wondering if you could comment on that and whether their share has work that flow in more, some work that just
Yeah.
to the law firms.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. My observation generally on legal departments is they swing back and forth on how much they're going to do in-house versus how much they're going to outsource to law firms. P&G has long been a legal department, and I inherited this, that does a lot of work in-house. And in fact, there were parts of it that I thought we shouldn't be doing in-house because we could get an expert to do it better and more efficiently than that. So I think the way we look at it, what we really are always working with outside counsel on, litigation. Very rarely will one of my people stand up in an advocacy, like occasionally, but very rarely. So litigation, major transactions, although my people are very involved, but major transactions, and areas of very high regulatory expertise. Those are the main areas where we really use and rely on our outside counsel. And like many in-house departments do today, we have preferred provider programs. Because it used to be that we just had hundreds of law firms, and people just chose whichever law firm they wanted, and that's just not a good system. Even from a monetary standpoint, I mean, you can if we get volume discounts, right, for using law firms more often, and so we've narrowed it down. And so it's interesting because what you hear today, I do hear that there's more work going back in-house, but I'm already starting to hear the other trend, which is why do you really want to pay people to work full-time with benefits, whatever, when you can send certain things out? So my feeling on it is it's just a balance that we constantly have to be looking at and striking. How can we best do this work for our business clients in the most efficient but also effective? And one of the hallmarks of my legal team is how well they know the business, which makes you pretty darn effective as a lawyer. So I think that will continue for us, but certainly heavily supplemented with outside counsel. So.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I'm sure that in your position at Procter Gamble, you really have to think about law and business strategy from a very global perspective. But also, like you said, law is inherently still somewhat geographical.
Yep.
As students, do you have any advice for students about how we can sort of prepare ourselves for the internationality of businesses nowadays as law students?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess I would say a couple of things about that. One is simply, and you're doing this every day in your studies, thinking as you're in your classes, not only about what is the law, but about why is it that, and how does it fit into this whole scheme of U.S. law, or maybe you have some international classes. Because the point is, you'll never ever in your career keep up. You might when if you're an expert on something, but it's very hard. For example, in my job, I can't possibly keep up with all of this, even in antitrust anymore, right? But what you're developing over time is your way of thinking about it so that you know the right questions to ask. Like, I'm a really good question asker because I'll say, wait a minute, that doesn't seem right to me. Why is that? Well, why is that so different from everywhere else in the world? That kind of thing. So starting to trust your legal instincts for being able to think, now, wait a second. I think is a really good, asking more questions than just assuming that you know. So I think developing that muscle while you're here in law school is a really good one to develop. I would say, you know, do some interesting reading from time to time. When you're in your shoes, it's very hard to have time to read anything, and I know that. So when you can't, you know, think about a TED Talk here or there or something. So you hear that, you know, you read in the newspaper something interesting going on about China. So go look it up and just, you know, just a couple of interesting things that sort of get you thinking. Because when you start thinking about something, your mind will note it anytime it comes up anywhere else in newspaper articles or whatever, and you'll start to sort of see that. I think that's kind of another good way to just understand the things that are really going on. And you can't keep up on everything, right? So, but if you can choose something like, I'm gonna understand this tariff situation a little bit better, or I'm gonna, and from time to time take that on. The situation will be far different when you get out of here. But again, you will have built those, you know, and kind of strengthened those muscles for how do you think about this? You know, what are the legal aspects? What are the business aspects? What are the political aspects? What do we have to worry about from a, you know, because geopolitical considerations, when you're in 180 countries, are just huge. And so it's just constantly, it's like, well, we were doing really well in this business, but now the currency has dropped in this country, and we were doing this, and now, you know, we have this horrible tsunami in Indonesia, which is so awful and sad, and has impacted so many. I mean, so it's not easy to keep up with it, even when I don't have to go to class. So for you, I would think of just a couple things that you might be interested in keeping track of, and then it's nice because it's hard to do, I know, but it takes you away from your normal everyday thinking, and I think also kind of refreshes your mind a little bit.
Thank you for sharing your story. I have a question concerning the switch from being an antitrust expert to business, to have a much broader perspective, advising not only on legal aspects, but also on the business strategy. So how was your speech? What skills do you need to develop when you consider such a switch?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the first thing I touched on a little bit earlier, which is just being willing to listen and learn. And in fact, again, as I've been reading some books and things lately about the future and about reinvention of people and their careers and so forth, because this country and the world were hit hard in the Great Recession, and we weren't quite ready for it. And so what does it really mean with all the technology that's coming and so on and so forth? And what's interesting is that a lot of the CEOs of today and other leaders are zeroing in that the number one most important quality going forward for all of us to be successful is going to be the ability to be a lifelong learner, to pivot, to be agile, to learn new things, and then be able to switch our thinking or switch actually our entire skill sets. So if you think about that's really important. And so I would say definitely was important for me. And if I were doing it again, I'd probably even double down on it, which is listen and learn. Don't start running at the mouth when you should be listening and hearing and kind of figuring out where can you add value and where can you fit in. So I would say that's a first. A second one is starting to trust your judgment. So it's really sort of interesting. It's a little bit akin to playing sports. So if you learn to play, I'll use golf because I play, I don't know if you could call it playing golf, what I do, but I like golf. And so when you first are learning something, provided you don't learn it as a child, because children are completely fluid in their movements, but adults are way too tense, right, in golf. And I learned to play golf as an adult. So when you first are learning, you're very mechanical about it, right? And you're just sort of, you know, am I doing this right? Do I have? And then there comes a time where you just realize, like, you're just swinging the golf club, right? You're not thinking about it, you're just swinging the golf club, and sort of some of your muscle memory has taken over. Well, similarly, I think for you, as you become lawyers, you may wake up one day and say to yourself, was that me who just gave all that advice yesterday off the top of my head? How did I even know that? Like, where did I learn that and whatever? And that actually will happen to you over time. It has to happen over time. Because as I tell my team, we have no soap to sell in our department. Like, it's here. And that's it, our judgment. So learning to trust that instinct. Like, I can't constantly tell my colleagues, well, I don't know exactly what the statute says. I'll get back to you. I have to say, all right, here's what I think. I think da-da-da-da-da. And then, of course, if I really am uncertain, I can come back and, but I have to trust my judgment. And I think that's something that you'll learn over time, and something that's a skill set that's really, really important. The fact of the matter is, and I'm not saying we should be reckless in our thinking, but things change so quickly now that even if we turn out to be wrong, or we as a company, or I give some wrong advice, we can pivot very, very quickly, and that's a good thing. So I would say those two things are very important. And then the final one I would say is trust. Most of us, and I don't know you, but I might be able to predict a few things about some of you based on where you are here and how successful you've been so far in your lives, or you wouldn't be here. But so many of us, we're perfectionists. We're control freaks. I call myself a recovering perfectionist control freak because it's recovering because I'm always working on it. But I have realized that it is the worst possible trait for a leader to have, is to be a perfectionist control freak. Your people will be afraid to try anything. They won't try because if you're going to come in and supersede them all the time. And the perfectionist side, if you're too much of a perfectionist, then you're afraid to make a mistake. And if you're afraid to make a mistake, you won't take smart risk. If a company doesn't take smart risk, a company will die. So that's just the reality. So trust in, I can't know possibly all of these laws. I can't know all of the facts. I have to sit with my people and say, give me the scoop, tell me. I have to trust in all that they tell me. If it doesn't sound right, ask the right questions. And then we make decisions together. But I'm generally going with the decisions they want to make, not always, because I have to have trust because they're the experts and I'm not. The buck stops with me, so I'll always support them in those decisions. But I have to be willing to have that trust. And it's hard. It's hard as a leader because you'll be a doer for a lot of years, right? And then you're asked to lead people and you're sort of like, okay, but I want to do. Okay, but you can't. They're doing and you're helping. So it's actually fun and it's really satisfying when it works, but you got to let go. And that's not easy. So
I think we're out of time.
Yes.
So thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you. It was fun. Thank you.